I watched my mother's BMW disappear into the terminal traffic from my seat in first class, a glass of champagne already in my hand. In another timeline, when I remembered with perfect, painful clarity, I would be standing at the curb right now, 17 years old, surrounded by luggage, watching that same car drive away and realizing with dawning horror that they weren't coming back. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The flight attendant smiled at me as she passed. "Comfortable, Miss Chen?" "Very," I said, settling deeper into the leather seat. Through the window, I could see the terminal where my family was probably just discovering that I'd never checked in for the economy flight they'd booked me on. The flight to that special school in Montana that was really a Reformation camp for troubled teens. The place where, in my first life, I'd spent 3 years of hell before aging out with nothing. No family, no support, no future. That was before I died at 23, broke and alone in a studio apartment, and woke up on my 16th birthday with every memory intact. My phone buzzed. My stepsister Melissa, right on schedule. "Where are you? Mom is freaking out." I smiled and turned off my phone. Let them freak out. By the time they figured out what happened, I'd be halfway to Singapore. The first time I lived through this day, I'd been too naive to see it coming. I should have known something was wrong when my stepmother, Claire, announced at breakfast that she'd arranged everything for my educational future. Should have questioned why Melissa smirked into her organic acai bowl while father avoided my eyes entirely. "It's a wonderful opportunity," Claire had said, sliding a plane ticket across the table. "A specialized academy in Montana, very exclusive." "But I was accepted to Stanford," I'd protested. "Early admission, full scholarship." "Which you'll defer for a year," father said, his voice flat. It was the tone he always used when Claire had made a decision, and he'd simply capitulated. "This program will give you structure, discipline." Melissa had laughed. "It's basically military school for screw-ups, Vera. Mom's sending you away because you're an embarrassment." "That's not," I'd started, but father had already stood up, conversation over. I'd been so stupid. I'd actually gotten on the plane that day believing it was some kind of mistake, that once I got there and explained about Stanford, about my 4.0 GPA and my perfect SAT scores, someone would fix this. Instead, I'd spent 3 years at Mountain Ridge Academy, a glorified prison where troubled kids were broken down and rebuilt, according to their parents' specifications. They'd taken my phone, my computer, my books. Mail was monitored, calls were supervised. I'd written to father 100 times. He never answered. Claire sent exactly one letter. "Stop being dramatic and do as you're told." When I aged out at 20, I had nothing. No college fund. Claire had convinced father to redirect it to Melissa's wedding. No family support. They'd moved to Greenwich without telling me and changed their numbers. No references, no connections, no safety net. I'd worked 3 jobs trying to save enough for community college. Lived in a basement apartment with black mold and cockroaches. Got sick. Pneumonia that I couldn't afford to treat properly. And one February morning, I'd woken up on that same morning of my 16th birthday, 5 months before the airport, Claire's voice drifting up from downstairs as she made her wonderful opportunity phone call. The second chance I'd been given wasn't magic. It was knowledge. And I'd spent every single day of the past 5 months preparing. First, I'd needed money. In my previous life, I'd inherited $50,000 from my maternal grandmother when she died. Money that Claire had managed for me until I turned 18, at which point she'd claimed it had been spent on my care at Mountain Ridge. This time, I'd called grandmother the day after I woke up reborn. "Vera," she'd said, her voice warm, "what a lovely surprise." "Grandmother, I need to ask you something important." I'd taken a deep breath. "In your will, you have money set aside for me, don't you?" A pause. "Yes. Your mother's inheritance, held in trust until you're 18. "How did you know about that?" "Father mentioned it once." "Grandmother, can we change it? Make it inaccessible to anyone but me? Not even father as trustee?" Another pause, longer this time. "Vera, has something happened?" And I'd told her. Not about the rebirth, she'd think I was insane, but about the school Claire had found, about the glossy brochure that hid horror stories I'd found online, about overhearing Claire tell Melissa that once I was gone, the money would be much easier to manage. Grandmother had always been sharp. She'd heard what I couldn't say outright. Within a week, my inheritance was locked in an irrevocable trust with an independent corporate trustee. Claire couldn't touch it. More importantly, Grandmother had started asking questions about my stepfamily that made Father very, very uncomfortable. Then came the documentation. I'd photographed everything. Claire's browser history showing her research into behavioral modification camps, the emails between her and Melissa about finally getting rid of the dead wife's brat, the financial records showing how they'd been systematically draining my mother's trust fund. I'd backed everything up to 3 different cloud services Claire didn't know existed. I'd researched lawyers, found the best family law attorney in California, and scheduled a consultation for the day after my 18th birthday. I'd documented every instance of emotional abuse, every favoritism, every cruel comment, built a case that would withstand any challenge. But most importantly, I'd applied to every scholarship, every grant, every program I could find. Used my knowledge from the first timeline to write perfect essays to ace every interview. By March, I had full ride offers from 6 universities, including Stanford. I'd accepted them all tentatively, keeping my options open. And when Claire announced her wonderful opportunity in May, I'd been ready. I'd played along perfectly, acted confused, hurt, obedient. Let them think they'd won. Let them drive me to the airport with my luggage. Let Claire hand me the economy ticket to Montana with that satisfied smile. "It's for the best," she'd said at the curb. "You'll see. This will make a woman out of you." Melissa had hugged me, whispering in my ear, "Have fun being tortured, freak. By the time you get back, if you get back, Daddy will have forgotten he ever had a first daughter." Father had said nothing, just nodded and gotten back in the car. I'd waved goodbye, watching until they disappeared into traffic. Then I'd walked calmly to the curb, flagged a cab, and told the driver to take me to the international terminal. The first-class ticket to Singapore, purchased with my own money from online tutoring jobs Claire didn't know about, had been hidden in my backpack. My real luggage, the important stuff, had been shipped ahead last week to Grandmother's address in the city. The economy ticket to Montana? I'd left it on a bench with a note, "Free flight, enjoy." By the time Claire realized I'd never boarded, never checked in, never even entered the domestic terminal, I'd be over the Pacific Ocean. Singapore was perfect. Grandmother had a cousin there, an elegant woman named Aunt May who ran an import-export business and had agreed to host me for the summer. More importantly, Singapore had no extradition for family matters, and I'd be 18 in 3 months. Once I was legally an adult, Claire had no power over me. I spent the summer working for Aunt May, learning business, building connections. I used my knowledge from the first timeline to make smart investments. Tech stocks I knew would boom, cryptocurrencies that would surge. Small amounts, nothing that would attract attention, but enough to build a real nest egg. I also spent the summer building my case. Every day, I'd document new evidence, new patterns. I'd found other families who'd sent their kids to Mountain Ridge Academy, connected with survivors, gathered testimonials, built an airtight case not just against Claire, but against the entire facility. When I turned 18 on August 15th, I was sitting in Aunt May's office on a video call with my attorney in California. "Everything is ready," Jennifer said. Her eyes were sharp, hungry. This was the kind of case that made careers. "Your father will be served with papers tomorrow morning. Full emancipation, protection order against your stepmother, petition for forensic accounting of your mother's trust fund, and a separate suit against Mountain Ridge Academy." "And the other thing?" Jennifer smiled. "The ethics complaint against your father's firm goes live tomorrow as well. Turns out using your position as a senior partner to funnel money from a client trust fund, even if that client is your own daughter, is very much against the California bar's rules. Father's career, his reputation, his pride, all built on being a respected attorney, all about to come crashing down because he'd let Claire talk him into betraying his first wife's legacy. "There's one more thing," I said. "I want to hold a press conference." The press conference happened in September, after Father had been served, after the forensic accountant had discovered that $200,000 of my mother's trust fund had been redirected, after Mountain Ridge Academy had been served with a class action lawsuit representing 47 former students. I stood in front of cameras and told my story, not the rebirth part, but everything else. The abandonment, the planned imprisonment, the stolen money, the conspiracy to destroy my future so Melissa could shine brighter. I showed the emails, played the recordings I'd made that last morning at the airport, read Claire's words in her own voice. Once she's locked away for a few years, she'll be so broken, she won't even fight for the money. We'll have everything. The video went viral within hours. #Justice for Vera trended on Twitter. News outlets picked it up. Stanford-bound teen nearly sent to abusive camp by stepmother. Think pieces about parental abuse, about the troubled teen industry, about wicked stepmothers who weren't just fairy tale villains. Father's firm put him on immediate administrative leave. The California bar opened a formal investigation. 3 of his major clients dropped him, but Claire fought back. She released a statement calling me a liar, a manipulator, a troubled teen who'd run away to avoid discipline. She went on talk shows, played the victim, the concerned mother who'd only wanted to help her difficult stepdaughter. It might have worked, except I'd prepared for that too. The second press conference happened in October. This one, I held jointly with 46 other former Mountain Ridge students. We stood together, told our stories, showed our scars. Physical scars from restraint techniques, psychological scars from isolation and psychological abuse, educational scars from years of stolen schooling. The attorney representing the facility tried to dismiss us as troubled teens making up stories. That lasted until we released the recordings. Turned out several staff members, disgusted by what they'd witnessed, had been secretly documenting abuses for years, waiting for someone with the resources and courage to fight back. The recordings showed children being dragged into isolation, showed therapy sessions that were really interrogations, showed teenagers being denied food, denied medical care, denied basic human dignity, all while charging parents $6,000 a month. Mountain Ridge Academy was shut down within a week. Criminal charges were filed against the director and 3 staff members. The civil suit settled for $47 million, distributed among all the survivors. My share was $850,000, enough to pay for Stanford and graduate school, with plenty left over. But I wasn't done with Claire yet. The really beautiful part came in November, during the deposition for the trust fund case. Claire, under oath, tried to justify taking my mother's money, claimed it had been spent on family expenses that benefited me too. Jennifer was ready. She pulled out record after record. Vacations I hadn't been invited on, Melissa's credit card bills, a new Mercedes, extensive home renovations to a house I'd been forbidden to bring friends to because I didn't deserve to host parties. So to clarify, Jennifer said, you took $200,000 from a trust fund established by a deceased mother for her daughter, and you spent it on luxury items for yourself and your biological daughter while planning to send that same girl to what you now know was an abusive facility. It wasn't like that. Yes or no, Mrs. Chen? Did you spend Vera's inheritance on yourself and Melissa? The deposition had to be paused while Claire consulted with her lawyer, but we had her on record, under oath, admitting to the theft. Father filed for divorce in December. His lawyer made it clear he was willing to cooperate fully with the trust fund investigation and testify against Claire if needed. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges against him personally, and I didn't do it out of mercy. I did it because watching him lose everything he'd valued, his career, his reputation, his second wife's respect, was punishment enough. And because somewhere under the spineless man who'd let Claire destroy me, there might still be a fragment of the father who'd once loved my mother. Claire fought the divorce viciously, which was perfect because the uglier it got, the more evidence came out. Evidence of affairs, of financial manipulation, of her systematic alienation of father from his first daughter. The court was not sympathetic. By the time I started at Stanford in January, mid-year admission, special circumstances, Claire had lost everything. The divorce settlement gave her almost nothing. Turned out California courts don't look kindly on step-parents who steal from stepchildren and commit fraud. She'd also been named in the Mountain Ridge lawsuit and was facing personal liability for her recommendations of the facility to 3 other families who'd also been defrauded. She'd moved back to her mother's house in Fresno, filing for bankruptcy, radioactive to every social circle she'd once dominated. Melissa had dropped out of her expensive private college. Father couldn't afford tuition anymore, not with his own legal bills and the restitution he owed me. Last I heard, she was working retail and living with Claire, the two of them trapped together in their bitterness. Father had moved to a small apartment, working as a contract attorney for a fraction of his former salary. He'd sent me one email. "I'm sorry, I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm sorry." I hadn't responded. Maybe I would someday, maybe I wouldn't. The beauty of having one completely was that I got to decide on my own timeline. Stanford was everything I remembered and more. This time, I wasn't carrying trauma, wasn't stunted by lost years. I joined clubs, made friends, threw myself into computer science and business courses. I'd learned something from my first life struggle. Money was power, but only if you knew how to use it. So I invested smart, worked hard, built connections. Started a small consulting company helping families research boarding schools and treatment centers, preventing what had almost happened to me from happening to others. By my junior year, the consulting company had grown into a full advocacy organization. We'd helped shut down 3 more abusive facilities and gotten legislation introduced in California, requiring independent oversight of therapeutic boarding schools. I dated, fell in love, had my heart broken, fell in love again. Lived the college experience I'd been denied the first time, and every time I was tempted to feel guilty about my advantage, about knowing what I knew, about the unfair edge Rebirth had given me. I thought about that 17-year-old girl standing at the airport curb watching her family drive away. Thought about the 23-year-old dying alone in a moldy apartment. I'd earned this second chance. Not with magic, not with luck, but with careful planning, strategic thinking, and the courage to fight back. Graduation came on a perfect May morning. Grandmother sat in the audience, beaming with pride. Aunt May had flown in from Singapore. Even Father was there, sitting alone in the back, his hair grayer than I remembered. After the ceremony, as I stood in my cap and gown surrounded by friends, I saw him approach hesitantly. "Vera," he said, "congratulations. Your mother would be so proud." It was the first time he'd mentioned her voluntarily in years. "Yes," I said simply. "She would." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then he nodded and turned to leave. "Father?" I called out. He stopped. "Thank you for coming." He didn't turn around, but I saw his shoulders shake slightly. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of celebrating families. Grandmother appeared at my elbow. "That was kind of you." "He's still my father," I said. "Somewhere under everything, he's still the man who loved my mother. That man made mistakes, but he's trying to be better." "And Claire?" I smiled. "Claire made her choices. She never loved anyone but herself. She'll live with those choices." 5 years later, I stood in my corner office in San Francisco, looking out over the bay. My advocacy organization had grown into a nationwide network. We'd helped pass federal legislation regulating the troubled teen industry. Mountain Ridge and facilities like it were mostly shut down or heavily monitored now. My investment portfolio had grown to 7 figures. I owned my apartment, drove a nice car, traveled when I wanted. I'd recently gotten engaged to a wonderful man who knew my whole story and loved me anyway. Claire had sent me a friend request on Facebook last month. I'd blocked it without a second thought. Some people deserved forgiveness. Some deserved to be forgotten. Melissa had reached out via email, a rambling message about how she'd been young and influenced by her mother. How she was sorry, how she hoped we could reconnect. I'd filed it away without responding. Maybe someday I'd feel generous enough to reply, but not today. Father and I had lunch once a month. Slow, careful conversations, rebuilding something that would never be what it was, but might become something different, something honest. He was sober now, in therapy, trying to understand how he'd let himself become a man who'd abandon his daughter. I respected the effort, even if I couldn't fully forgive. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Flight to Tokyo, 8 p.m. I was giving a keynote speech at an international conference on children's rights. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, stopping to look at the framed photo on my desk. It was from that day at the airport, from a security camera. I'd obtained the footage through my lawsuit. You could see me at the curb, young and small, watching the BMW drive away. But if you looked closer at the timestamp, you could see it was taken exactly 3 minutes after I'd been dropped off, which meant I'd already left. This photo showed an empty curb where I should have been, but wasn't. because I'd already changed my fate, already gotten on a different flight. The photo reminded me every day. Second chances were precious, but they weren't magic. They were opportunities, nothing more. What mattered was what you did with them. I smiled, turned off my office lights, and headed for the elevator. I had a flight to catch, and this time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.